Not everyone has a home, sweet home. A new bride wants to be a wealthy widow.
He'd been conned and taken for a ride.
A middle-aged matron gets a taste for murder.
I can't even imagine the terror, the betrayal.
Open.
And 3 generations under one roof is an explosive mix.
This was a domestic violence time bomb.
Old San Juan, Puerto Rico, 2003. A city of opportunity for young Canadian real estate tycoon Adam Enheng.
Everything he touched turned to gold. When Adam came to Puerto Rico, he was so excited about the potential of the real estate market.
The single 30-year-old.
Young guy who's been very protected by very good parents in the suburbs of Canada.
I've been a naughty girl.
She's doing things to him that no woman has ever done before. Ever, never.
Adam's friend, Carlos Torrado, knows all about Aria.
I said, here you're going out with this girl, and she's really not somebody you should, keep close.
She's not who you think she is. She's trouble.
Aria was arranging parties for groups of men, and she'd provide scantily clad young women as entertainment. That's prostitution. It was a ring.
But Adam knows what he's in for. He keeps it strictly business.
He's paying her $500 a night, a couple of times a week.
That's a tremendous amount of money for sex. Wow. What up to do to be responsible?
In March 2005, Aria marries her millionaire. Their business arrangement becomes personal. And Adam has a new family. Ready or not.
Put it over there. Yeah. All right, that's good. Okay. Hi.
What are they doing here?
They live here now.
No, they don't.
Yes.
He finds this beautiful mansion, and within a day, he's got his mother-in-law, his sister-in-law, her boyfriend, and her brother living in the house.
He's not happy.
He will do what he's told.
He'd been conned and taken for a ride by little Aria.
To the good life.
Adam feels like an intruder in his own home.
Every time he walks into a room, they're speaking Spanish. Every time he walks into a room, everybody gets quiet.
He felt very unwelcome in his own home.
What are you doing?
I'm leaving.
What?
You heard me.
Just 1 week after tying the knot, Adam's had enough.
He should have left town.
San Juan, Puerto Rico, 2005. Aria Vasquez Rijos' new millionaire husband walks out of their 1-week-old marriage. But she won't let him go that easy.
What, you don't think you have to answer my calls anymore? Look at me when I'm talking to you.
We don't need to talk. We have lawyers to talk for us.
She was harassing him all the time. She was showing up at his work and screaming at him about money.
I will ruin you.
Adam was smart enough to have his wife sign a prenup. He just didn't think he'd be needing it so soon.
The prenup said Aurea would get $180,000 for 2 years.
What about a baby, huh?
But he felt like he had an obligation. She was carrying his child.
But Adam's obligation doesn't last long after he orders a test and discovers the baby isn't his
0%.
or Aurea's.
There was no baby. He felt like a fool.
Aurea wants more than her prenuptial payout. But with her baby scam exposed, she needs another way to leverage her husband. She threatens to ruin his reputation and plants drugs in Adam's car.
More than once, I found bags of weed or bags of cocaine.
The bottom line here is Adam became afraid of her. And he had every reason to be scared. She had connections in the underworld.
He was afraid of what she was going to do.
Adam wants the harassment to stop,
No, it's all good. You don't have to be sorry for that.
so he makes his wife an offer she can't refuse.
Okay, ciao.
What's the story?
I'm giving her what she wants.
I don't think that's a good idea.
I said, Adam, this is not a good idea. And he says, Carlos, I'm giving her all this money. There's no way she can say no to that.
On September 22nd, 2005, the pair meet on neutral ground. But they'll both get more than they bargained for.
He stabbed Adam more than 20 times. To his neck, his face, his torso.
He hits her once. Run, baby, run! Adam's main concern was for her to get away, to run.
His last thought was her safety.
Aurea survives. Adam dies before the emergency services arrive.
When police arrived on the scene, it looked like a robbery, but nothing had been taken.
She's still got her purse. He's got his watch. He's got his money and his... What did this guy rob?
And a witness reports something odd.
They saw Aurea speaking to the killer while Adam was laying flat on the ground. Then when they wanted to question Aurea, she said, no, I've got to get a lawyer. Aurea sent up a bright red flag to the police when she refused to be questioned. Not too smart.
As a widow, Aurea stands to gain far more than a divorcee. But Adam's family are suspicious. They freeze their son's assets as investigators dig deeper. They soon have a match from the witness description. The attacker is Alex Pabon Colon, AKA Crazy Alex. And he sings like a bird. He had actual hard evidence that he was able to give them in the forms of emails and texts from Aurea about the two of them killing her husband.
It's gotta be tonight.
What's in it for me?
Aurea, her sister, and her sister's boyfriend.
$3 million.
met up with this guy named Crazy Alex.
Okay.
If she was a widow, she'd have a third of his estate, and that was $8 million.
Aria was deft at manipulating naive men, but she had no skills when it came to picking a contract killer.
Crazy Alex was so freaking incompetent. Aria had to remind him, "You're supposed to attack me too."
The fake robbery is exposed. The conspirators arrested and charged with murder. Except one, the mastermind. Aria flees to Europe, where she stays on the run for 7 years. It's not until 2013 that justice finally catches up with Aria.
She landed in Spain and Interpol was sitting there waiting for her at the airport.
For years, she fights extradition to Puerto Rico. Finally, in 2018, Aria Vasquez Rijos is convicted of conspiracy to use interstate commerce facilities in the commission of murder for hire. She is sentenced to life in prison, no chance of parole.
I lost a friend. I lost a real good friend. Adam had no malice in his head. He was really good in business. He was really good as a person, and he would help anybody that was around him.
Adam would have given her anything she wanted.
Aria wasn't happy with a generous customer who became a generous husband. She wanted more.
This woman has no redeeming qualities at all, and she's exactly where she needs to be for the rest of her life. Serial killers have revealed that they feel a tremendous sense of power, an almost God-like feeling.
It's a story as old as time. A bored housewife looking for excitement gets more than she bargains for.
What's the worst thing that can happen to a minister? Sexual infidelity, marital infidelity.
Mr. Mawson! You harlot!
Reverend Wake,
And he kicked her out, and he maintains custody of the kids.
for a woman with her reputation ruined, the options are few. If she's lucky to have the means, her best hope is to run far away, to start over.
Why isn't his wife looking after the children? She passed away. Oh, how terrible.
In these times, widowers don't stay single for long. At least not those with means.
Don't they look scrumptious?
Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming.
Moses
Have a wonderful
Worms is a successful merchant, raising 2 children on his own.
day. You must be the new arrival I've been hearing about.
Yes, I've just moved here from Wales.
Very nice. Welcome to New Orleans.
Thank you.
I'm sure she's very sexually attractive to this man, this charming, beautiful young woman.
Well, you should try some.
Perhaps I shall.
Her singular focus was to find a wealthy man to marry. And he was very wealthy. And it seemed
Oh dear, no, where are you from?
But gossip can move as quickly as she does, so Pamela needs to stay ahead of it.
Excuse me.
there were a lot of people from Wales in New Orleans that knew who she was
She was concerned that her past might catch up with her.
Pamela needs her new husband and family out of town, away from the gossip. So she feigns illness.
Oh, dear.
Pamela was not only greedy, she was very clever. So she got him to relocate.
A cure-all of the time is a move to the country. So Moses' rural property in Illinois becomes their new home for an extended period.
Coming here has saved me.
I'm grateful you're feeling better. But I do miss my family. They haven't even written.
In those days, of course, the only way to hear from family was letters.
But Moses isn't being ignored by his family and friends. He's being cut off.
She kept those letters from him.
Coffee, Mom. Please.
In this way, she could say that your family doesn't care about you.
Things come to a head when Moses decides to return to New Orleans.
I might pay them a visit.
Whatever you think is best.
That's when Pamela got pretty nervous.
She just can't risk having him out of her sight for any length of time. Somebody else might get his ear, start talking sense to him, and then it's bye-bye Pamela.
Fearing the true story of her past has reached New Orleans and will soon reach her husband's ears, Pamela thinks fast.
She was beginning to panic. She had to get Moses back to Illinois. How best to do that? Arrange an accident for one of his beloved little children.
Down there, right next to those brambles.
He's 12 years old, so he's very impressionable, and she claims that there's some injured animal out in the woods.
Pamela Worms's 12-year-old stepson, Tom, is drowning because she wants him to.
He's holding onto some brush.
My God!
And then she tries to step on him. This poor boy's crying, "Ma, why are you doing this to me? I'm a good boy."
I can't even imagine the terror that he felt and the betrayal.
I mean, who could do that?
With water still on her boots, Pamela reports her stepson missing. And her husband rushes home.
Moses returns as fast as he could. He finds his new wife just distraught.
There's still no sign of him.
She's bewildered and crying and emotionally upset that the boy's not home.
The whole town's searching.
Please, you must stay with me.
Of course.
Moses is devastated, and of course he's not going to go anywhere right now. He is just consumed with grief.
When Tom's body is found in the lake, there are no suspicions.
The biggest cause of death in the colonial period was people drowning. So not very many people knew how to swim.
Pamela's secret past remains hidden. But for how long?
Thank you, my dear.
When Moses' relative, Mrs. Brock, arrives, she becomes a new threat.
Thank you, Lord, for the time we had with him. May he rest in peace.
Amen.
Amen. Yes,
my
it's
dear.
very nice.
Brimming with news from family, Mrs. Brock becomes suddenly ill. Within hours, she's bedridden, unable to speak.
Allow me, ma'am. I'll do it.
In the 1800s, people died of intestinal issues a lot.
No.
Open.
Or if they got a bad flu and they didn't recover.
Tragedy strikes again. But this time, it doesn't keep Moses in Illinois.
It's time for us to leave this place.
Whatever you think is best.
It drives him back to New Orleans.
Moses, I think, is feeling like he needs comfort of his extended family.
But their departure is delayed when his 8-year-old daughter falls ill.
If only we'd moved.
You can't blame yourself.
It was a long, drawn-out, torturous event.
Moses is again heartbroken and even more determined to move back home. But Pamela has thought of that too.
I think at some point he realizes, there's kind of no one left in this household, Pamela and me, and I don't think it's looking too good for me.
So he's getting sicker, and a friend comes to visit.
Yo, Moses! What's the matter, Moses?
I'm a dead man.
Moses has only the strength to finalize his will. He dies on October 14th, 1851. Pamela no longer has to worry about her reputation. Everyone who counts is dead. There's just one thing left to do: collect the inheritance.
The sad part about it is that she went through all this effort, but he had taken her out of the will. So she's left with nothing.
Pamela's world unravels.
Rumors start flying. And then, of course, there's the friend who heard from the dead man's lips, "My wife is doing this to me."
Yeah, my wife has poisoned me.
And Moses's autopsy proves devastating.
His body is just full of poison. Arsenic, blue rocket, which is a vegetable kind of poison. He's just filled with poison.
And who was tending him? Who was his favorite nurse? His poisoner wife, Pamela.
Pamela Worms is arrested. In 1851, she is convicted of the first-degree murder of her husband. She is sentenced to death by hanging. Awaiting execution, she shows no remorse. Instead, she wants a local pastor to record her confessions. All of them.
Hello, Pastor.
Are you ready?
Of course.
She chose to tell her whole story, every awful detail.
What a wretch I was.
Pamela addressed killing multiple people like a grocery list. I killed this person, I killed that person. There was no emotion attached.
I need not dilate on the death of my aged husband. The evidence in court was both accurate morning.
They needed each other, perhaps loved each other, but they needed to fight. A blind man could see where this was going.
Mothers and daughters can have complicated relationships. And in Perth, Australia, in 2015, Helen Lavina and her mom, Ella, are having a bad time.
Mama! Turn that off!
Small things begin to irritate them and drive a wedge in between them, such as her mother waking up at 4 in the morning and turning on the television.
Fate has brought them together under the same roof, and it's not working out.
Mama! Turn it off! I can't sleep. Please give it back.
These things would crop up from time to time, the arguments and the yelling, but it seemed to be a short time frame and then it was over and dealt with.
Brokering the peace is Helen's 24-year-old daughter.
Good morning, Mother.
Morning, darling.
Good morning.
Life threw the three together when 57-year-old divorcee Helen injured her back.
Helen was doing very well for a long time, working in various IT departments of major corporations, and then she had an accident.
I didn't mean any harm.
I know, just my back hurts so much. I need sleep.
After several surgeries, she wasn't much better and eventually had to take a physical disability and was unable to work.
Perhaps I should be paid to look after you.
Come on, you two. She wasn't able to interact with people. She was no longer socially inclined in her neighborhood.
But her mom, Ella, loves company.
Ah, these are my favorite.
Oh, I've never seen them before.
Oh, you love them.
She has regular visitors from her local church.
These are delicious.
The women from the church would come over frequently and sit and talk with her. I think Ella appreciated the feminine companionship.
It's another source of conflict.
Oh, you remember my daughter?
Mama, can I see you for a minute?
Close quarters, bad feelings, all contributed to an environment of tremendous tension.
The temperature rises with each passing day.
You stupid cow! Don't talk to me like that.
Helen actually told one of the neighbors that she hated her mother, called her a bitch. Not something that even an unloving daughter would want to say.
Helen even takes the extraordinary step of calling the police.
My mother is destroying my house. I need the police.
So Helen actually called and said that she'd been assaulted by Ella and that she was suffering dementia.
It was no accident.
But there's little evidence to support Helen.
When police attended, they didn't see any injuries and there was no complaint of injuries at all.
I just want you to take her away.
Helen wanted the police to take Ella away, but of course, there was no reason.
I just want her out of here.
Police offer help, but Helen brushes them off.
There's hope you can get.
She's become frustrated and annoyed and just told the police to leave and get out. There's no arrangements to be able to live somewhere else.
But nothing between this mother and daughter is easy.
A blind man could see where this was going. This was a time bomb.
In the suburbs of Perth, Australia, the maternal bond between Helen Lavina and her 76-year-old mother, Ella Jeremiah, is broken. Under the same roof, they fight over everything.
What are you doing?
Especially money.
You steal money from your own mama?
Ella had pension checks. Helen had a small disability check, but it wasn't enough.
There's bills to be paid. You owe me.
They would argue with money. It was sometimes heated.
You make money out of me.
They were dependent on blaming each other for their problems and arguing. Now we have the added factor that Helen has become dependent on her mother's money. And this is never a good thing between adults.
Ella's escape plan is underway. Soon she'll be free.
It's perfect.
Glad you like it.
When can I move in?
Next Tuesday.
She loves it, agrees to go in the next day, sign the papers, and pick up the keys.
I'll be back soon.
There's just one more thing. Telling her daughter.
What have you got there? You've been to the housing department. I can't live here any longer. What have you done to me?
On the evening of February 22nd, 2016, plans change.
The evidence shows that Helen just snapped. It didn't seem to be a premeditated event. Helen just used tools, instruments that were at hand. She used a kitchen knife. She used a scissor.
First, hurting her so badly in the head, it removed a piece of her scalp and skull. She stabbed her multiple times in both of her legs, indicating the rage that Helen felt for her mother.
Years of frustration come to this. Helen kills the woman who brought her into the world.
Helen had to decide what to do. Part of it was disposing of the body. The other part was cleaning up all the blood, because her kitchen looked like a crime scene. She certainly didn't want her daughter to discover her in this bloody kitchen with her own mother dying in her arms.
Ella's new home will be the garden.
Hi. Has Babushka gone to bed already?
No. She's moved out.
When she asked her mother,
where's she gone?
Her religious friends came and got her.
Helen said Ella went away with the religious people that she had become friends with.
Probably for the best.
That this was a good thing for Ella.
Intergenerational peace lasts for 9 days, until disturbed by the family pet.
She's gone outside and she's noticed that the dogs were moving in and around the areas of the bins, and that's when she's noticed what appeared to be a human body. She was scared, and so she called police straight away.
I think there's a body in our yard.
Of course, it turned out to be Ella's.
With a history of conflict noted by police and neighbors, there's soon a prime suspect. Investigators find Helen doesn't just have a history of animosity with Ella. She has her ID, her credit card, and her life insurance policy.
Now things were becoming crystal clear.
Surveillance footage seals Helen's fate. She's caught withdrawing money from her mother's account.
Helen pleaded not guilty, still saying her mother ran away with the religious people, despite the fact that her body was found in the backyard.
She fools no one. In 2017, Helen Lavina is convicted of murder. She is sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years. A mother's love is one of the most powerful forces on earth. And so is a daughter's anger. Helen and Ella were like two whirling planets, locked in each other's gravitational pull.
The truth of the matter is, she couldn't live with her and she couldn't live without her. And in the end, she decided to kill her. She preferred to kill her than to let her go.
If people can't stop fighting, they should get away from one another.
These deadly women destroyed happy homes. Aria Vasquez Rios' big dreams turned to...
It begins with a sound no one remembers clearly anymore. A dull echo swallowed by rain, by traffic, by the endless breathing of Tokyo at night. Because in the spring of 2001 the city never truly slept, it only lowered its voice, and somewhere between the last train and the first newspaper delivery, a young woman vanished without a scream, without a struggle anyone could later swear to, leaving behind nothing but a ripple that would widen for decades. A missing person report stamped at 6:42 a.m., a photograph pinned to a corkboard, and a question that refused to die. She was 24, an office worker in Shinagawa, punctual, invisible in the way millions of people are invisible every day in Tokyo, carrying a shoulder bag with receipts still inside, a phone that would ring unanswered, a routine so precise her co-workers could tell time by her footsteps, and on the morning she did not arrive, the absence felt louder than any alarm. Police were notified before noon, her parents arrived from Chiba by evening, and by nightfall the word Matt Tichbian had begun to crawl across radio reports, whispered by taxi drivers, folded into conversations over convenience store counters, because disappearances happened, yes, but this one felt wrong in a way people could not articulate, as if the city itself had misplaced something it could not afford to lose. The last confirmed sighting placed her under fluorescent lights at a train station exit, cameras catching her only in fragments, a shoulder here, a reflection there, the time code jittering as if uncertain, and then nothing, a gap so clean it felt deliberate. Investigators walked the route she should have taken home, counted vending machines, measured alleyways, knocked on doors where lights were still on at midnight, but Tokyo is a maze that eats certainty, and every answer opened into 10 more questions. Her apartment showed no signs of a struggle, no packed suitcase, no farewell note, nothing missing except her. The bed was made. The television remote lay where it always did. A cup sat rinsed but not dried, suggesting she expected to return. The word cold case was not spoken yet, but the temperature was already dropping. Within days, posters appeared, then newspaper photos, her face reproduced so many times it began to blur into the background noise of the city. Another pair of eyes asking for help from walls already crowded with pleas. Tips poured in, hundreds of them, sightings at bus stops, in pachinko parlors, on bridges, always just late enough to be useless. One witness claimed to hear raised voices near a parking structure that night. Another swore she saw a woman matching the description entering a car, black, maybe dark blue, maybe silver, the color changing with every retelling. Police followed each lead with methodical urgency, pulling phone records, questioning co-workers, tracing her commute like a ritual. But nothing stuck, nothing held, and weeks stretched into months as the headlines shifted from alarm to curiosity to silence. Behind closed doors, detectives argued over theories that refused to align. Voluntary disappearance made no sense. She had no debt, no known conflicts, no history of running. An accident would have left something behind. Abduction suggested witnesses, evidence, noise, and yet the city had offered none. Tokyo, with its millions of eyes, had seen nothing, or worse, had seen something and let it pass without recognizing it mattered. The investigation narrowed, then stalled, then circled back on itself, files growing thicker even as the trail grew colder, until finally the case was placed on a shelf, not closed, never closed, but quieted, the way unresolved things often are, waiting for time to do what evidence could not. Years passed. The posters faded. New faces replaced hers on missing persons boards. Detectives retired. Parents aged. Technology advanced. The city changed its skyline and pretended nothing underneath had shifted, but in Shinagawa, in her old neighborhood, people still remembered the night the routine broke, the moment when safety felt less solid, when the idea took hold that someone could be erased between stations. Every anniversary brought a brief flare of attention, a small article, a candlelight vigil, and then the story would sink again, labeled quietly, almost apologetically, as a cold case. Then, 2 decades later, a voice surfaced. It came not from a lab or a newly discovered file, but from a police station far from the original investigation. During an unrelated questioning, a man in his 40s sitting under harsh lights, hands folded, posture calm, who asked almost casually, what would happen if someone confessed to something old, something forgotten? At first, officers assumed he was fishing for a deal, for attention, for leverage, but when he spoke her name correctly, when he described details never released to the public, the room shifted. Pens stopped moving. The air tightened. Somewhere, a case number long dormant flickered back to life. The confession was incomplete, uneven, full of pauses that felt rehearsed and others that felt dangerously sincere. He claimed to have met her by chance, claimed a conversation, claimed an argument, claimed panic, but the timeline wavered, locations blurred, and when pressed, he contradicted himself just enough to keep doubt alive. Yet there were details, unsettling details about the route she walked, the bag she carried, the way she hesitated at intersections, details that clawed their way into the investigation like ghosts demanding to be acknowledged. News broke within hours. Tokyo 2001 cold case reopened, headlines screamed, and by morning the phrase confession shocks entire nation dominated screens, because Japan does not often revisit its old mysteries, and when it does so with unease. The public reaction was immediate and visceral. Talk shows dissected every word. Former investigators were pulled back into the light, their memories interrogated alongside the suspect. Online forums erupted, some convinced justice had finally arrived, others certain this was a false confession, a performance feeding on a wound that never healed. The family, notified before the press, faced cameras they had learned to fear, their expressions carved by years of waiting, hope and dread tangled so tightly they were indistinguishable. The question hung heavy over everything. If this was true, why now? And if it was not, what kind of person would dare reopen such pain? Police moved carefully, reopening boxes sealed for years, re-examining evidence through a modern lens, running DNA where possible, mapping cell tower data that had once been too crude to be useful. Some things aligned disturbingly well with the confession. Others refused to cooperate. No remains were found. No definitive physical proof emerged to anchor his words to reality. The suspect led investigators to locations that had changed beyond recognition. Parking structures demolished, riverbanks reshaped, memory battling concrete. Each failed search chipped away at certainty, and the word cold case began to feel less like a status and more like a curse. As days turned into weeks, cracks appeared. The suspect recanted parts of his statement, then reaffirmed others. Experts debated the psychology of confessions, the allure of notoriety, the weight of guilt, real or imagined. Prosecutors hesitated. Without a body, without conclusive evidence, the law tightened its grip, demanding more than shock, more than belief. The nation watched, breath held, as the story refused to resolve itself neatly, refusing the comfort of an ending. And beneath the noise, beneath the arguments and speculation, the original mystery remains stubbornly intact. A woman still missing. A city still complicit in its silence. A truth still hidden somewhere between memory and fact. The reopening of the case did not bring clarity. It brought heat, friction, a reminder that some questions survive time precisely because they resist answers. Tokyo moved on as it always does, trains running on schedule, lights flickering to life at dusk, but now, layered over the familiar rhythm, was the revived echo of that unanswered sound from 2001, the knowledge that even after a confession, even after national shock, the cold case was not finished with them yet. The confession did not bring relief, it brought noise, a low relentless hum that seeped into every corner of the investigation, because once a cold case is reopened the past stops being quiet, it demands answers with interest, and the first thing detectives did was rewind time, back to the night everyone thought they understood, back to the route she walked so often it had become muscle memory, a path etched into her life by repetition, now redrawn with suspicion. They pulled archived maps, grainy surveillance stills, handwritten notes from officers long since retired, and spread them across tables under fluorescent lights, layering old assumptions with new doubts, asking not what they believed in 2001, but what they might have missed. The suspect's words echoed in the room, fragments replayed again and again, some details ringing uncomfortably true, others wobbling like scenery in a cheap stage play, and the line between coincidence and knowledge blurred until no one trusted their instincts anymore. Investigators retraced the commute minute by minute, recalculating times with modern precision, matching train schedules to ticket gate logs, reconstructing the flow of bodies through stations that had since been renovated, their walls repainted, their cameras upgraded, and yet the ghosts remained. Witness statements from the original case were pulled from files and reread with fresh eyes, noticing what had once seemed trivial, a pause in a sentence, a hesitation, a description too vague to matter then but now sharp with implication. One witness had mentioned a man standing too close on the platform. Another recalled a brief argument, nothing dramatic, just tension, the kind commuters ignored every day. At the time, these details drowned in the city's constant friction. Now they rose like signals breaking through static. The suspect claimed he met her near the station exit, said their paths crossed by chance, that words were exchanged, that something escalated. Police tested the plausibility with ruthless precision. Could he have been there? His employment records placed him nearby, but not conclusively. Cell phone data from that era was sparse, towers overloaded, records incomplete, a technological gap that mocked modern expectations. Still, there were overlaps, small but unsettling, moments where his story intersected with verified facts, enough to keep him in the frame even as certainty refused to settle. The interrogation room became a theater of controlled pressure, questions delivered calmly, then repeated hours later to see what shifted, what stayed fixed, and what cracked under repetition. Outside, the media fed on every development, turning speculation into headlines, headlines into certainty, certainty into outrage. Confession credible? Asked one paper. Nation divided over cold case suspect, declared another. Public opinion fractured along familiar lines, some demanding swift justice, others warning of tunnel vision, of the danger of wanting closure so badly that any answer would do. Experts paraded across screens dissecting false confessions, the psychology of guilt, the weight of cultural shame, while social media threads mapped the suspect's life in obsessive detail, strangers playing detective, convinced patterns hid in plain sight. For the family, the reopening was a second disappearance, the past torn open and examined under lights they could not escape. They listened to statements filtered through lawyers and police liaisons, every word measured, every hope tempered by years of disappointment. The confession offered a shape to their grief, but not yet substance, and uncertainty, they had learned, could be more exhausting than despair. They visited old places, stations they had avoided for years, stood where she was last seen, surrounded by cameras and microphones, their private pain once again public property. Behind the scenes, forensic teams worked quietly, methodically, chasing leads that had not existed 20 years earlier. Soil samples from suggested locations were tested. Rivers were scanned with equipment unimaginable in 2001. DNA from items preserved against all odds was re-examined, hoping for a miracle, a microscopic link that could anchor the confession in reality. Results came back slowly, some promising, most inconclusive, each one a reminder that time is both ally and enemy, preserving traces while erasing context. The city itself resisted, redevelopment having paved over memory, turning potential crime scenes into convenience stores, offices, parking lots, places so ordinary no one questioned what lay beneath. As pressure mounted, the suspect's narrative shifted again. Subtle changes at first, a location adjusted, a sequence reordered, explanations offered for inconsistencies that felt practiced, then defensive. Investigators noted everything, aware that truth can stutter but lies often overcompensate. Still, there was no definitive moment, no dramatic collapse, no clear line crossed. The man remained calm, cooperative, his demeanor frustratingly controlled, giving just enough to sustain interest without delivering the final blow of certainty. The cold case, once dormant, now pulsed with life, but it was an unstable energy, threatening to consume resources, reputations, and trust. Prosecutors faced an impossible equation. A confession without a body, evidence suggestive but not decisive, a public demanding answers louder with each passing day. In Japan's justice system, the threshold for action is high, and rightly so, but the weight of national attention pressed hard against procedural caution. Meetings stretched late into the night, legal arguments rehearsed, worst-case scenarios mapped, because charging the wrong person would not only fail the victim, it would poison the case forever. Meanwhile, alternative theories resurfaced, emboldened by doubt. Old suspects were whispered about again. Men once cleared now dragged back into online speculation. A theory involving organized crime dismissed years ago gained new traction among armchair analysts. Another suggested she had encountered someone entirely unknown, a chance meeting that left no digital footprint, no history to trace. Each theory competed for oxygen, each one highlighting how little was truly known, how fragile the narrative had always been. Detectives felt the strain acutely. Some had worked the original case as rookies, now nearing retirement, confronting the possibility that their life's work might still end without resolution. Others were younger, inheriting a mystery already heavy with legacy, aware that any mistake would be magnified by history. They moved forward anyway, driven by the stubborn belief that even if the truth could not be proven, it deserved pursuit. The phrase cold case took on a different meaning, less about temperature and more about endurance, about how long a question could survive before wearing everyone down. As weeks blurred into months, momentum slowed. Searches yielded nothing definitive. Forensic results failed to cross the line from interesting to conclusive. The confession, once explosive, began to lose heat, scrutinized into exhaustion, its initial shock replaced by careful skepticism. Media attention shifted, not away but sideways, focusing on the process rather than the promise of resolution. The nation waited, caught between wanting closure and fearing the cost of a wrong one. And through it all, the central absence remained unchanged. A woman who never came home. A night that never explained itself. The reopening of the case had illuminated how much had been forgotten, how much had been assumed, and how little had been proven. Tokyo continued its relentless motion, but under the surface, beneath the schedules and screens, the revived mystery lingered unresolved, pressing against the present, reminding everyone that reopening a cold case does not guarantee warmth, only the chance to feel the chill all over again. The problem with reopening the past is that it refuses to stay still, and as the investigation pushed forward, the timeline that once seemed fixed began to warp, stretching and compressing under scrutiny, because memory is not evidence and certainty erodes when revisited too often. Detectives noticed it first in themselves, in the way old notes suddenly felt unfamiliar, in how conclusions once written with confidence now read like guesses dressed as facts. The confession had not clarified the story. It had destabilized it, shaking loose assumptions that had held the case together for years. And in that instability, new questions multiplied faster than answers could keep up. They went back to the night again, not as it was remembered, but as it might have been, stripping it down to movements and possibilities, asking who else was there, who else could have crossed her path unnoticed. Train logs showed thousands passing through the same station within minutes of her disappearance. A river of anonymity no investigation could fully dam. The city's efficiency, once seen as safety, now looked like camouflage, its orderliness masking countless unrecorded interactions. Police canvassed again, this time not just for witnesses but for patterns, for anomalies in routine that might suggest something had gone wrong long before anyone realized. A former coworker came forward, prompted by the renewed attention, recalling a conversation from weeks before she vanished, something about feeling watched, followed, nothing dramatic, nothing she had considered worth reporting at the time. The memory was vague, unanchored, But it injected a new unease into the narrative, hinting at a threat that predated the confession entirely. Investigators tracked down others from her workplace, some now scattered across the country, some reluctant to revisit a chapter they had closed emotionally. Their recollections varied, inconsistent, shaped by years of retelling the story to themselves in ways that made sense. No single account aligned cleanly with the suspect's version, but none definitively ruled it out either. The suspect, aware of the shifting ground, grew more guarded. His lawyers spoke more. His statements shortened. When confronted with contradictions, he explained them away as confusion, stress, the passage of time, defenses that were both reasonable and convenient. Psychologists consulted by the police warned against overinterpreting inconsistency, reminding them that truth does not always arrive neatly packaged, but neither does deception always announce itself clearly. The line remained thin, and every decision felt consequential. As the investigation widened, so did the circle of scrutiny. Internal reviews questioned whether the original case had been mishandled, whether bias or fatigue had led detectives to overlook critical leads. Files were audited, decisions dissected, not to assign blame, officials insisted, but to understand failure. Still, the implication hung in the air, uncomfortable and heavy, that the truth might have slipped away not because it was clever, but because it was inconvenient. For the police, this possibility was corrosive, threatening trust not only in the case but in the institution itself. Public discourse grew harsher. Protesters gathered outside police headquarters demanding transparency, justice, resolution. Others countered with calls for restraint, warning that pressure could force a false conclusion. The case became a mirror for broader anxieties about accountability, about memory, about whether systems designed to protect could also forget. Every development was framed as either progress or proof of incompetence, leaving little room for the slow, uncertain work investigations actually require. Late one night, investigators received what seemed like a breakthrough, an anonymous tip pointing to an abandoned storage facility once located near her route home, a place demolished years earlier but remembered by some as a gathering spot, poorly lit, easy to overlook. The suspect's earlier statements referenced something similar vaguely, enough to raise eyebrows. Ground-penetrating radar was deployed on the site, now a parking lot. Media kept at a distance as technicians scanned beneath asphalt for anomalies. For hours, anticipation built, speculation running ahead of fact, until the results came back inconclusive, shapes and shadows that could not be definitively identified as anything at all. Hope deflated quietly, replaced by the familiar ache of almost. The near miss deepened skepticism. Critics seized on it as evidence the investigation was chasing ghosts, retrofitting the landscape to fit a confession rather than letting evidence lead. Supporters argued the opposite, that every possibility deserved exploration, no matter how long the odds. Inside the task force, morale dipped, then steadied, professionals accustomed to disappointment reminding themselves that most cases do not break open cleanly, that persistence is measured in years, not headlines. Meanwhile, the family retreated from public view, overwhelmed by the renewed cycle of expectation and letdown. Statements released through representatives grew shorter, more cautious, gratitude tempered by exhaustion. They had learned not to believe until proof arrived, a lesson carved by time. Still, privately, they followed every update, every rumor. Their lives once again tethered to an investigation they could not control. As months passed, the confession's initial shock faded into something more troubling: normalization. It became one element among many, no longer a singular event, but a thread woven into a tapestry of unresolved questions. The case did not move forward or backward. It spread outward, touching other mysteries, other failures, becoming emblematic of the difficulty of resurrecting truth after so long. The phrase cold case appeared again and again in commentary, no longer just a label but a warning, a reminder of how easily certainty can freeze when time intervenes. Investigators faced a choice they had hoped to avoid. Without decisive evidence, they could not proceed to charges, but abandoning the confession entirely risked missing the one chance they had been given. The compromise was limbo, an extended state of open investigation that satisfied no one fully but preserved the possibility of progress. Officially, the case remained active. Unofficially, it hovered suspended between action and inertia. Tokyo watched, then slowly resumed its distance, attention drifting as new stories claimed the spotlight. But the undercurrent remained. Late-night radio shows still discussed it. Online forums continued to analyze old photos, new maps, alternative theories. The disappearance had re-entered the city's consciousness, not as a solved mystery, but as a reopened wound, sensitive to touch, slow to heal. And somewhere within that unresolved space, the truth remained elusive, perhaps simple, perhaps unbearable, hidden behind layers of time, interpretation, and human error. The confession had promised revelation but delivered complexity instead, exposing how fragile answers can be when the past is dragged into the present. The cold case was alive again, not warmed, not healed, but breathing, restless, reminding everyone involved that reopening a mystery does not guarantee resolution, only the certainty that the question will now refuse to go quiet. Time, once an enemy, became an accomplice in unexpected ways, because as the investigation lingered, people who had stayed silent began to speak, not with certainty but with fragments, half-remembered impressions dislodged by the constant repetition of the story. A former station attendant contacted police after recognizing himself in an old clip replayed on television, recalling a woman who seemed distracted that night, glancing over her shoulder more than once, hesitating before exiting the gates as if weighing a decision she had not planned to make. He had not thought it mattered then. In Tokyo, hesitation is common, crowds disorienting, minds elsewhere. Now the memory felt heavier, as though it had been waiting for permission to matter. Investigators logged the account carefully, placing it alongside dozens of similar recollections, each one a potential spark or a false light. Patterns began to emerge, not strong enough to prove anything, but consistent enough to unsettle. Several witnesses, independent of one another, described a sense of unease in her demeanor during her final commute, a subtle tension that contrasted with her normally routine-driven habits. The possibility took shape that whatever happened did not erupt suddenly but unfolded gradually, a chain of small moments invisible to everyone except the person living them. This perspective challenged the confession in a fundamental way. The suspect had described an impulsive encounter, a sudden escalation, a single catastrophic decision. But if she had been uneasy earlier, if something had already been wrong, then either his account was incomplete, or he had entered a story already in motion. Detectives pressed him again, testing this angle, asking whether he noticed fear, hesitation, reluctance. His answers were careful, neither confirming nor denying, sliding around the question with practiced ambiguity. It was enough to keep suspicion alive, not enough to secure truth. Behind closed doors, investigators debated whether they were dealing with one perpetrator or several, one event or a sequence. Cold cases have a way of simplifying themselves over time, narratives compressing until they fit neatly into memory, but reopening them expands everything again, revealing how many branches had been pruned for the sake of manageability. The possibility that the confession intersected with the truth without fully explaining it was deeply unsettling, suggesting a reality more complex and less narratively satisfying than the public wanted. Media coverage adapted accordingly, shifting from the suspect as centerpiece to the investigation itself, questioning methods, timelines, assumptions. Documentaries revisited the original disappearance with dramatic reenactments, layering sound and shadow over uncertainty, while commentators argued whether the confession had helped or harmed the pursuit of justice. Ratings climbed. Opinions hardened. The case became both entertainment and cautionary tale, a reminder of how unresolved stories invite projection. Police leadership grew wary of the spectacle. Leaks tightened. Briefings shortened. The official line emphasized patience and diligence, words that sounded responsible, but felt evasive to a public hungry for movement. Internally, resources were reassessed, priorities shifted, the task force trimmed but not disbanded, its members acutely aware that attention once lost would be difficult to regain. Cold cases, they knew, survive on momentum as much as evidence. One afternoon, a development arrived quietly, without cameras or headlines. A forensic analyst reviewing old property logs noticed a discrepancy in the cataloging of items recovered from the missing woman's apartment, a minor clerical inconsistency that had gone unnoticed for years. It led to the rediscovery of an object long dismissed as irrelevant, a small personal item whose significance had not been understood at the time. Advanced testing was ordered, not with high expectations, but with the recognition that cold cases are often revived by the smallest details. The results did not deliver certainty, but they did complicate the picture further, indicating contact with someone outside her known circle around the time of her disappearance. The finding did not point directly to the confessor, nor did it exclude him. It simply expanded the pool of possibility, reinforcing the sense that the truth was dispersed, scattered across moments and interactions no one could fully reconstruct. Investigators felt both encouraged and frustrated, another step forward that refused to become a leap. The suspect was informed of the new development. His reaction was muted, but something shifted, a subtle tightening, a defensiveness that had not been as pronounced before. Lawyers intervened more aggressively. Cooperation became conditional. The dynamic changed, signaling that whatever game was being played had entered a more dangerous phase. For detectives, this was familiar territory, the point at which openness often gives way to strategy, when truth, if it exists, must be extracted rather than offered. Publicly, speculation reignited. Some interpreted the forensic finding as validation of the confession, others as proof of misdirection. Online, amateur analysts mapped connections, proposing scenarios increasingly elaborate, some grounded in evidence, others bordering on fiction. The line between investigation and myth blurred, the story acquiring layers that threatened to obscure its core. The missing woman risked becoming a symbol rather than a person, her life reduced to data points and theories. The family, shielded from specifics, sensed the shift nonetheless. They spoke less, retreated further, choosing privacy over participation in a narrative they could no longer influence. Friends described them as brace for disappointment, hope tempered into something quieter, more durable. They had learned that answers, when they come, rarely arrive whole. As the year drew on, the reopened case reached an uneasy equilibrium. Not solved, not abandoned, active, but constrained by evidence that hovered just short of decisive. The confession remained on record, neither validated nor dismissed, a constant provocation challenging investigators to either substantiate it or move beyond it. Neither option was simple. Both carried risk. In the background, Tokyo continued to transform, new construction rising where old streets once ran, memory increasingly misaligned with geography. Each alteration erased another reference point, another chance to anchor speculation in physical space. Time again pressed forward, indifferent to unfinished business. By the end of the fourth phase of the renewed investigation, one truth had become unavoidable. Reopening the case had not simplified it, had not drawn it closer to resolution in any linear way. Instead, it had revealed how much remained unknowable, how deeply the disappearance had embedded itself in the city's subconscious. The cold case was no longer just about what happened in 2001, but about what happens when a society refuses to let a question die, even as it struggles to answer it. Silence returned in stages, not all at once, a gradual thinning of noise as headlines shortened, cameras packed up, and the city's attention drifted. But inside the investigation, the pressure never fully eased. It simply changed shape, becoming heavier, more internal, because now every decision carried the weight of everything that had already failed. Detectives understood they were entering the most dangerous phase of any cold case revival, the point where effort risks turning into obsession, where the desire to resolve can quietly distort judgment. They slowed themselves deliberately, reviewing not just evidence but their own assumptions, aware that the confession, however incomplete, had reoriented the entire case around one man, perhaps too conveniently. A parallel line of inquiry was quietly expanded, deliberately understated, aimed at answering a question that had lingered since 2001 but never been fully confronted. What if the disappearance was not singular, not a clean narrative with a single villain, but the intersection of multiple unrelated choices that converged disastrously in one night? This approach required abandoning the comfort of coherence, accepting that the truth might be fragmented, unsatisfying, resistant to summary. It meant revisiting overlooked possibilities not because they were promising, but because they had never been conclusively ruled out. Investigators began re-examining reports of other disappearances from the same era, not to suggest a pattern outright, but to understand context, to see whether the city itself had been experiencing a vulnerability that no one had named at the time. Files were pulled, timelines overlapped, routes compared. Most led nowhere. A few raised questions. None offered answers. Still, the exercise reinforced a sobering reality. In a city this large, coincidence is inevitable, and distinguishing it from connection is one of policing's hardest tasks. The suspect remained under scrutiny, but at a measured distance. Without grounds for arrest, pressure had to be calibrated carefully. Surveillance was limited. Interviews became infrequent, strategic. Every interaction was documented with painstaking neutrality, as though tone itself could contaminate the record. Prosecutors reviewed materials repeatedly, testing them against legal standards that cared little for public expectation. Each time the conclusion was the same: compelling, troubling, insufficient. This impasse fueled frustration within the task force. Some argued for renewed, aggressive questioning, believing the suspect would eventually collapse under sustained focus. Others cautioned restraint, warning that overreach could compromise what little leverage remained. The debate was professional but intense, shaped by experience, ego, and the quiet fear that time once again was slipping away. Leadership listened, deferred, delayed, choosing continuity over drama, a decision that would later be praised or condemned depending on how the story ended. Outside official channels, the case continued to mutate. Independent journalists published long-form pieces dissecting the confession line by line, interviewing criminologists, sociologists, anyone who could contextualize uncertainty. Podcasts reconstructed the night with cinematic flair, layering ambient sound over speculation, blurring fact and inference in ways that unsettled investigators but captivated audiences. The missing woman's name became searchable again, her image circulating with renewed intensity, familiar to people too young to remember the original disappearance. With attention came distortion. False tips surged, some well-meaning, others malicious. Individuals contacted police claiming psychic insight, dreams, anonymous knowledge they refused to substantiate. Each lead had to be logged, assessed, closed, a bureaucratic grind that consumed time without yielding substance. The danger of reopening a cold case, investigators realized, was not only false hope but false noise, a volume of information that threatened to drown the signal entirely. Amid this, a subtle but important shift occurred. One of the original detectives, long retired, agreed to a recorded interview as part of an internal review. Away from cameras, without the pressure of public narrative, he spoke candidly about doubts he had harbored even then, moments where the investigation had moved on too quickly, not out of negligence but exhaustion, limited resources, the unspoken understanding that not every case could receive infinite attention. His reflections did not reveal a hidden clue, but they did expose the human constraints behind the file, reminding everyone that the case had always been shaped by what was possible, not just what was true. These admissions did not change the evidence, but they altered its interpretation. Decisions once seen as definitive were recast as provisional, choices made under pressure rather than conclusions reached with certainty. The confession viewed through this lens looked less like an answer and more like an intrusion into an already imperfect narrative, exploiting gaps that had existed all along. This realization unsettled the task force deeply, forcing them to confront not only what they knew, but how they had come to know it. The family was informed of these reflections in careful, indirect terms. There were no apologies offered, no confessions of error, only acknowledgments of complexity, of limitation. They received the information quietly, without visible reaction, perhaps because none of it was new to them emotionally. They had lived with uncertainty for decades. The idea that the investigation had been constrained by circumstance was not a revelation, only a confirmation of what absence already implied. As winter approached, the reopened case settled into a grim rhythm. Periodic updates, quiet reviews, occasional media spikes followed by lulls. The confession remained unresolved, neither validated nor dismissed, a fixed point around which everything else rotated. It was no longer shocking, no longer fresh, but it continued to exert gravity, pulling attention back whenever momentum threatened to fade entirely. Tokyo, for its part, absorbed the story back into its layers. The station where she was last seen bustled as always, commuters unaware of the weight assigned to specific tiles, specific exits. New buildings stood where old ones had been speculated over, their foundations sealed, their past inaccessible. The city did not remember in monuments or plaques. It remembered in stories, retold unevenly, reshaped by each generation. By the end of this phase, it was clear that the reopened cold case had reached a second plateau, different from the first, more visible but no closer to resolution. The confession had disrupted complacency, forced re-examination, reignited public memory, but it had not delivered truth. Instead, it had revealed how fragile truth can be when time intervenes, how easily it fractures under scrutiny. What remained was not an answer, but an atmosphere, a persistent tension hanging over the investigation and the city alike, the sense that something important had happened and that understanding it fully might no longer be possible. The case endured, suspended between revelation and silence, its coldness no longer defined by neglect, but by the chilling realization that even when a mystery is reopened, it can still refuse to yield. The sixth movement of the reopened case unfolded without announcement, without a single headline to mark its beginning, because by now the investigation no longer advanced in bursts of drama but in slow, grinding increments, each one costly in effort and uncertain in reward. What changed was not the evidence, but the posture of those chasing it. Detectives stopped asking what they could prove and began asking what they could responsibly eliminate, a quieter discipline, less visible, but often the only way forward when certainty refuses to appear. They started by dismantling the confession piece by piece, not to discredit it outright, but to test its internal logic against the world as it had existed in 2001. Every claim was anchored to verifiable data where possible: weather records, transportation logs, business hours, construction schedules. Small discrepancies emerged, not dramatic contradictions, but misalignments that accumulated like hairline fractures in glass. A shop the suspect claimed was open had closed early that night. A route he described would have been blocked by roadwork documented in municipal archives. None of these alone invalidated his story, but together they weakened its structural integrity. At the same time, investigators forced themselves to confront an uncomfortable possibility: that the confession could be partially true, containing authentic contact but misrepresenting outcome, or that it could be entirely false yet informed by leaked or inferred details absorbed over years of public discussion. The latter was particularly troubling, because it meant the case itself had become a source of contamination, its repeated exposure blurring the boundary between insider knowledge and educated guesswork. In a city saturated with media, even secrecy has a half-life. This realization prompted a quiet audit of information flow. Who had access to what and when? Which details had truly never been released, and which had merely been forgotten as public? The answers were less reassuring than hoped. Some undisclosed facts had appeared fleetingly in early reports, then vanished from collective memory. Others had been shared informally, off the record, during the original investigation. The myth of a perfectly sealed case file dissolved, replaced by a more human, more vulnerable reality. Meanwhile, the task force revisited physical evidence once more, not expecting miracles, but looking for interpretive errors rather than new data. Old assumptions were challenged aggressively. Why had certain items been dismissed as irrelevant? Why had some leads been prioritized over others? The exercise was humbling. In several instances, decisions had been driven not by probability, but by manageability, choices made to keep the investigation from spiraling beyond available resources. The confession, now stripped of its initial authority, looked increasingly like a disruption that exploited those old constraints. Publicly, this shift was invisible. Official statements remained measured, non-committal. Privately, frustration deepened. Detectives who had initially believed the confession might finally unlock the case now felt the weight of diminishing returns. The suspect, sensing the change, withdrew further, cooperation narrowing to what his counsel deemed unavoidable. The window for extracting anything new from him appeared to be closing, not with a slam, but with a soft, irreversible slide. The media, detecting stagnation, adjusted its tone. Stories became reflective rather than urgent, focusing on the emotional toll of unresolved cases, the psychology of waiting, the concept of justice delayed to the point of abstraction. The missing woman's name appeared less frequently in breaking news and more often in essays, retrospectives, symbolic lists of the unsolved. This reframing softened public anger but also dulled pressure, a double-edged relief for investigators who needed space but feared invisibility. In this quieter phase, one development cut through with unexpected force. A data analyst assigned to the case, reviewing unrelated municipal archives, noticed a pattern of minor incident reports filed near the victim's route over several months prior to her disappearance. Individually, they were insignificant. Complaints of loitering, disturbances, suspicious behavior that resolved without incident. Collectively, they suggested a localized problem that had never been escalated because it never crossed a threshold. The reports did not name anyone. They did not describe crimes. But they clustered in time and place in a way that was difficult to ignore. The finding did not point to the confessor. It did not point to anyone specific at all. What it did was reopen the idea that the disappearance might have been the culmination of something gradual, something that developed in plain sight but below the level of alarm. Investigators traced the reports, interviewed officers who had responded, most of whom remembered little beyond routine. Still, the pattern lingered, a shadow of context rather than a lead, reinforcing the sense that the truth might not reside in a single dramatic act, but in a series of missed moments. This perspective resonated with some within the task force and unsettled others. It implied that even a correct confession might never tell the whole story, that accountability could be partial, diffuse, unsatisfying. For a justice system built on clarity and attribution, this was a deeply uncomfortable conclusion. Yet it aligned disturbingly well with the evidence as it stood. The family was briefed again, cautiously, the message framed around diligence rather than progress. They listened, asked few questions, thanked the officers, and returned to their private vigil. Those close to them observed a subtle shift, less anticipation, more resignation, as if they had begun preparing themselves for an ending without resolution. Hope, once reignited, was settling back into something colder, more familiar. As the months wore on, the confession's role in the investigation diminished further. It remained a factor, a reference point, but no longer the axis. The case, in effect, began to disinter itself, spreading attention across a wider field of uncertainty. This diffusion was intellectually honest but emotionally draining. Without a focal villain or a clear path, momentum became harder to sustain. Tokyo predictably adapted. The story slipped further into the background, resurfacing only on anniversaries or during slow news cycles. For most residents, it became a remembered headline rather than a pressing question. But for those closest to it, investigators and family alike, the cold case entered a new, colder stage, not defined by neglect, but by acceptance of limits. By the end of this phase, one truth stood out with uncomfortable clarity. Reopening the case had revealed not how close they were to an answer, but how many ways the answer could remain permanently out of reach. The confession that once shocked the nation now sat stripped of its power, neither solution nor distraction, simply another artifact in a growing archive of uncertainty. The mystery endured, quieter, heavier, its presence no longer dramatic but deeply entrenched, like a scar beneath the surface of a city that had learned how to live without closure. By the seventh phase, the case had entered a state that investigators rarely name but all recognize, a kind of investigative twilight where effort continues not because resolution feels imminent, but because stopping would feel like surrender. There was no official announcement marking this shift, no memo declaring a new direction. It was sensed instead in quieter meetings, longer pauses before decisions, in the way questions were framed less with expectation and more with caution. The cold case was no longer chasing revelation, it was managing endurance. The task force narrowed again, not as a retreat but as a recalibration. Specialists rotated out, core investigators remained. The goal was no longer expansion, but containment, preventing the case from dissolving into either neglect or spectacle. Each remaining lead was ranked not by excitement but by plausibility, and many were finally allowed to die, formally closed with careful documentation, a process that felt uncomfortably like admitting defeat, even when it was necessary discipline. Attention turned inward toward one of the most difficult questions any investigation can face: whether the case as constructed was even solvable. Not philosophically but practically. Evidence degraded. Witnesses aged or forgot. Locations vanished. Digital gaps from the early 2000s remained unbridgeable. The law demanded certainty that time had eroded. Acknowledging these limits did not mean abandoning the search for truth, but it did require redefining what success could realistically look like. Within this reframing, the confession was revisited one last time, not as a potential solution, but as an object of study. Behavioral analysts examined its structure, its cadence, the emotional markers embedded in the suspect's language. They compared it against known patterns of false, coerced, opportunistic, and confabulatory confessions. The conclusion was unsatisfying but honest. It did not fit cleanly into any category. It contained neither the chaos of a purely false confession, nor the grounded specificity of a verified one. It occupied an ambiguous middle ground, suggestive of contact, but evasive on consequence. This ambiguity became, paradoxically, its defining feature. It explained why the confession had been so disruptive, why it had reignited the case without advancing it. It offered just enough truth to destabilize the narrative, just enough doubt to prevent closure. In this way, the confession mirrored the case itself, incomplete, unresolved, resistant to resolution. The suspect, now largely silent, faded from public consciousness. Without new statements, without visible confrontation, he became less a figure of outrage and more a footnote, his role uncertain, his significance unresolved. For some, this felt like injustice. For others, restraint. For investigators, it was simply reality asserting itself. Without evidence, attention alone could not sustain a case indefinitely. Outside the investigation, cultural interpretation of the disappearance continued to evolve. Academic papers cited it in discussions of urban anonymity. Crime writers referenced it as an example of modern mystery without narrative payoff. It entered the category of stories that exist not to be solved, but to be contemplated, unsettling precisely because they resist meaning. This transformation disturbed the family deeply. The sense that their loss was becoming abstract, symbolic, detached from the person at its center. In response, they took a step they had avoided for years. Through a carefully worded public statement, they reasserted her humanity, speaking not about theories or suspects, but about routines, habits, small preferences, the ordinariness of the life that had been interrupted. The message was quiet, restrained, but it cut through the accumulated noise. It reminded the public that the cold case was not an intellectual exercise, but an absence that had reshaped lives. Investigators welcomed the statement privately, though it offered no new leads. It recentered the case around its original purpose, a moral anchor amid procedural drift. Still, it could not reverse the fundamental trajectory. The investigation had reached the point where progress, if it came at all, would likely come from chance, from an external disruption, a discovery no one could predict or plan for. As weeks passed, internal discussions turned to preservation, how to ensure the case file remained accessible, intelligible, protected from further decay. Digital archiving protocols were updated. Physical evidence was recatalogued with renewed care. The goal shifted subtly from solving the case to safeguarding it, preserving the possibility that someone someday with different tools or perspectives might see what had been missed. This transition was emotionally complex for the team. It felt like both responsibility and retreat. They continued to work, continued to review, but without the illusion that effort alone could force an answer into existence. The cold case had taught them again that truth does not always yield to persistence, and that sometimes the most honest outcome is uncertainty. Tokyo barely noticed this internal shift. The city had long since absorbed the story into its background hum. New scandals, new crimes, new shocks occupied the headlines. The disappearance resurfaced only occasionally, usually framed as a reminder rather than a developing story. For most, it belonged to the past, a mystery from another era. But for those bound to it, the case entered a quieter, heavier phase. No longer dramatic, no longer hopeful. Still open, still unresolved, still present. The confession that once promised upheaval now sat inert, its shock spent, its meaning unresolved. It had changed the case without completing it, leaving behind a landscape altered but no closer to truth. By the end of the seventh phase, the investigation existed in a state of suspended vigilance. Not abandoned, not active in the traditional sense. Waiting but without expectation. The cold case had survived reopening, survived scrutiny, survived national attention, and in doing so, had revealed its most unsettling quality, its ability to endure without answers, to persist not as a problem to be solved, but as a question that refused to disappear. The eighth phase arrived almost unnoticed, slipping in under the guise of maintenance, of routine, because by now the investigation no longer felt like a pursuit but like stewardship, caretaking a question too large to resolve yet too important to abandon. What changed was subtle but significant. the case stopped reacting to pressure and began responding to time itself. Instead of chasing developments, investigators began anticipating absence, planning for the long silence that often follows the last wave of attention. A quiet reorganization took place inside the archives. Boxes were relabeled. Digital files were standardized. Handwritten notes from the early 2000s were scanned and cross-referenced, their margins filled with speculation now treated as artifacts rather than guidance. The goal was clarity, not discovery, ensuring that whoever encountered the case in the future would see it whole, unwarped by rumor or repetition. This act of ordering felt ceremonial, an acknowledgement that the case had entered a different kind of life. During this process, one detail resurfaced that had not been ignored so much as misunderstood. A brief interaction documented early in the investigation, a passing contact reported by a commuter who had since moved abroad, resurfaced with new context. At the time, it had been logged as inconsequential, an everyday exchange in a crowded city. Now, re-examined without the pressure of immediate resolution, it suggested something quieter, more ambiguous. Not confrontation, not alarm, but recognition. Two people noticing one another in a way that lingered just long enough to matter. The problem was that recognition leaves no trace. It does not register on cameras. It does not trigger reports. It exists only in memory, and memory 2 decades on is a fragile medium. Investigators attempted to track down the witness again, but contact failed, records outdated, the trail dissolving into international distance. The moment hovered, tantalizing, unverifiable, emblematic of the case itself. This reframing led to a renewed internal debate, less about guilt and more about narrative. Had the investigation been too focused on disruption, on dramatic deviation from routine, when the truth might have unfolded within routine itself? Tokyo's safety is often described in absolutes, but safety is statistical, not personal, and rare events hide best where they are least expected. The disappearance might not have been the result of a violent rupture, but of a quiet misalignment, a wrong decision made in a moment that felt ordinary. The confession in this light looked even more ambiguous. It could represent an attempt to impose drama on ambiguity, to force a story where none would fully cohere. Or it could be a partial confession to a partial truth, involvement without full consequence, proximity without ownership of outcome. The law, however, does not operate in partials. It requires lines, definitions, accountability that could be proven beyond doubt. The case offered none of that. Public interest continued its slow decline, but something else replaced it. A steady undercurrent of reflection. University seminars referenced the case when discussing memory and justice. Journalists returned to it not for updates but for lessons. The phrase Tokyo 2001 cold case began to function less as a headline and more as shorthand, a reference point for unresolved absence, invoked when discussing the limits of investigation in hypermodern cities. For the family, this evolution was bittersweet. On one hand, the disappearance was not forgotten. On the other, it was no longer theirs alone. It had been absorbed into discourse, abstracted. They navigated this tension carefully, granting fewer interviews, choosing words that emphasized continuity rather than hope. Their grief had matured into something quieter, more stable but no less heavy. One member of the task force described the feeling succinctly during a private debrief. The case no longer asked to be solved, it asked to be remembered correctly. That idea reshaped how remaining work was approached. Efforts focused on eliminating misinterpretations that had accumulated over time, correcting small errors that, left unchecked, could harden into false consensus. It was unglamorous work but necessary, a defense against the erosion of truth through repetition. The suspect's name appeared less frequently in internal discussions. Without new information, his relevance diminished naturally, not through exoneration but through evidentiary gravity. He remained on record, his confession preserved, contextualized, annotated but no longer central. This decentering was deliberate, an attempt to prevent the case from collapsing into a single unprovable theory. Occasionally, a new tip arrived, triggered by an anniversary article or a late-night broadcast. Each was assessed with the same careful neutrality, most leading nowhere, a few prompting brief reconsideration, none altering the trajectory. The pattern became familiar, almost ritualized, hope flaring briefly before settling back into restraint. Investigators learned to recognize the rhythm and protect themselves from its emotional toll. Tokyo, in its vastness, continued to provide cover for the unresolved. New generations passed through the station where she was last seen, unaware of its history. The physical city gave no indication of the question embedded within it. Only records remembered. Only people remembered. As the eighth phase drew on, the cold case reached a strange equilibrium. It was neither advancing nor retreating, neither alive with momentum nor dead from neglect. It existed in a state of informed suspension, held open by intention rather than expectation. The confession that once shocked the nation now functioned as a marker, a moment when the past surged into the present and then receded, leaving behind altered contours but no conclusion. What remained was a sense of unfinishedness that resisted closure. Not dramatic, not explosive, persistent, the kind that settles into the background of institutional memory, shaping how future cases are approached, how assumptions are questioned. The Tokyo 2001 disappearance had become a reference not because it was solved, but because it wasn't, because it demonstrated how easily a person could vanish without explanation, even under the gaze of a city built on surveillance and order. By the end of this phase, the investigation stood as a testament to restraint. Files preserved, questions documented, silence acknowledged rather than filled. The cold case endured not as a failure to act, but as an acceptance of uncertainty, a recognition that some truths remain just beyond reach, not because they are hidden, but because they are scattered too widely to ever be gathered back into one definitive answer. By the ninth phase, the investigation had become almost ritualistic, each step carefully measured, predictable in its unpredictability, because the investigators had learned that cold cases do not bend to urgency, they bend only to patience, and patience is hard, slow work, unremarkable to an outsider but exhaustive to those living it. The confession, once a seismic event, now occupied a more muted space, a reference point to be weighed and catalogued, rather than a force driving action. Its impact had shifted from shock to ambiguity, a quiet tremor felt through the corridors of the task force, rather than the headlines of the nation. This phase began with a painstaking reanalysis of transportation records. Investigators sought to reconstruct her movements, second by second, station by station, trying to understand not only where she went, but how the city around her shaped her path, how ordinary interactions might have contributed to the extraordinary outcome. Every train arrival and departure, every gate swipe, every recorded camera frame was scrutinized, cross-referenced with schedules, maintenance logs, and even weather patterns. Tokyo in 2001 was less surveilled than it is now, but enough data remained to map possibilities, not certainties. The reconstruction revealed moments that had seemed inconsequential at the time. A delay in one line that forced her to wait longer on a platform, a blocked exit that rerouted her through a shadowed passageway, an unattended bag that had briefly drawn the attention of passing commuters. None of these moments were evidence of a crime, none implicated anyone directly, but together they illustrated a city that was both predictable and chaotic, a place where vulnerability could accumulate invisibly. Investigators began to see her disappearance not as a single act but as a series of converging circumstances, a cascade initiated by small deviations from routine. At the same time, interviews with former colleagues and neighbors were revisited, this time with a focus on mood and behavior rather than facts alone. Subtle anxieties noted in passing, hesitations, fleeting glances, nervous laughter, were reinterpreted through the lens of modern psychology. Analysts suggested these signs might indicate awareness of being observed, unease about something unspoken, or simply stress. The line was impossible to define conclusively. Each recollection, vague as it was, became a thread in a tapestry too frayed to mend, yet too important to ignore. The confession was weighed against these reconstructions. Investigators asked themselves whether his account could coincide with this emergent pattern of indirect influences. Could he have encountered her without dominating the story entirely? Could his admission represent proximity, rather than direct causation? The questions were impossible to answer definitively, but they reframed the investigation, shifting the goal from establishing guilt to understanding context. Meanwhile, subtle signals arrived from outside the investigative framework. Journalists published long-form retrospectives drawing attention to overlooked minor incidents from the early 2000s. Reports of disturbances near transit lines, missing property, suspicious behavior in commuter districts. Individually, none were striking. Collectively, they suggested an environment where small vulnerabilities could compound unnoticed. The investigators noted these findings, integrating them into the broader narrative, careful to separate conjecture from verifiable detail. The task force faced new operational challenges. Many original witnesses had moved, some abroad, others unreachable. Memories faded or altered. Records were incomplete, and technology from the early 2000s could not be fully reconciled with modern systems. Each attempt to follow a lead felt like chasing smoke. Shapes took form, then dissolved into uncertainty. Every decision carried heightened risk. Misinterpretation could reinforce false conclusions. Inaction could let potential clarity slip away. Amid these frustrations, the team began exploring the city itself as evidence. Footpaths, station layouts, and building renovations were examined, not for dramatic breakthroughs, but for understanding. Could the spatial environment, unnoticed at the time, have contributed to the disappearance? Could minor changes in urban design, narrowed corridors, unlit corners, temporary barriers, have created opportunities invisible to the casual observer? This spatial thinking shifted some focus away from individuals toward circumstance, adding depth to an investigation long dominated by speculation about a single suspect. The suspect, still present in the investigation but less central, remained guarded. His statements were rare, carefully scripted. Lawyers controlled access. Without new evidence, pressure had to be applied subtly, with patience replacing confrontation. In this liminal space, every word, every hesitation, every evasive response was scrutinized, catalogued, analyzed. Yet even with expert attention, the confession remained incomplete, a fragment floating above an already complex canvas. Public awareness continued to drift. News cycles moved on. The disappearance occasionally resurfaced in retrospectives or anniversary pieces, framed less as breaking news and more as cultural memory, a case study in urban vulnerability and unresolved grief. The family, by now seasoned in living with ambiguity, maintained their privacy, issuing statements emphasizing remembrance rather than expectation. Their grief had become disciplined, quiet, but no less present. By the end of this phase, the investigation occupied a paradoxical space. Active in preservation, restrained in action, expansive in conceptualization, yet bounded by the limitations of time, memory, and evidence. The confession remained a shadow, neither illuminating nor disappearing, a ghost that shaped how the case was approached but never resolved it. The Tokyo 2001 cold case persisted, not as a story moving toward conclusion, but as a living question, its absence felt as intensely as its facts, a constant hum beneath the surface of the city that refused to forget. The 10th phase of the investigation unfolded in quiet, almost imperceptible shifts, yet each movement carried the weight of decades. By now, the cold case had taken on a rhythm entirely its own, independent of public interest, independent even of the confession that had once shaken the nation. It existed as an ecosystem of memory, documentation, and inference, a living archive sustained by persistence rather than revelation. Every decision, every action was tempered by the realization that misstep could not be corrected, that even small errors could distort the fragile narrative irreversibly. Investigators returned once more to the physical scene of disappearance. Tokyo had changed. New buildings obscured old routes, stairways had been altered, signage replaced, surveillance technology modernized. The team traced her last known movements, comparing maps from 2001 with current infrastructure, attempting to visualize the night as it had been. They reconstructed line-of-sight trajectories, angles of light at different hours, distances between platforms and exits, nothing overlooked. Each minute detail became a potential clue, though most yielded nothing beyond affirmation of what was already known. The city was dense, disorienting, and indifferent. At the same time, forensic techniques that had barely existed at the time were applied retroactively. Digital footprints, small traces of material evidence previously considered insignificant, were subjected to new methods: chemical analysis, trace DNA cross-referencing, pattern recognition. Results were incremental, often ambiguous, yet they reshaped understanding subtly. One fiber, one trace of material, suggested contact with someone outside her immediate circle, corroborating the idea that the disappearance involved more than a single interaction. It did not incriminate anyone, but it reframed possibilities, reminding investigators that the case was multi-layered. The confession was revisited in this context. Behavioral analysts compared his account with reconstructed timelines and new forensic interpretations. The result was striking. The confession did not neatly align with either evidence or circumstance, nor did it entirely contradict it. It existed in parallel, a narrative overlay on the events, plausible in some respects, impossible in others. Investigators described it internally as a shadow confession, capable of influencing perception without clarifying truth. It had shocked a nation once, but now it functioned more as a psychological artifact than a path to closure. Pressure from outside had ebbed almost entirely. The media's appetite for sensational updates had waned, replaced by retrospectives, analytical essays, and documentaries. Social media occasionally rekindled interest during anniversaries, but the intensity had dimmed. Public attention no longer dictated the pace of the investigation. Patience rather than urgency governed every action. This shift allowed investigators to work without spectacle but introduced new tension. How to sustain momentum when the world no longer demands it, when every lead takes months to confirm, and most fail. Family engagement remained cautious. The relatives had grown adept at navigating the tension between hope and reality. They avoided speculation, emphasizing remembrance over action. Their statements, restrained and consistent, reinforced the human element of the case. That behind every file, every confession, every forensic test, was a person whose absence defined their lives. This perspective subtly influenced investigative strategy, reminding detectives that procedure alone could never encompass the human cost. A breakthrough of sorts emerged from re-examined communications. Old phone logs, emails, and records were analyzed using pattern recognition software that had matured in the years since the original investigation. Connections previously invisible emerged as faint threads. Indirect contacts, overlapping locations, minor coincidences of time and presence. None were conclusive, but together they painted a portrait of social proximity that suggested her disappearance was not entirely random. It implied interaction, choice, presence of another party, but again without definitive identification. The suspect remained on the periphery. No new evidence tied him definitively to these subtle patterns, yet his confession, incomplete and inconsistent, continued to inform interpretation. He was less a source of disruption than a lingering question mark, a reminder that the case could not be approached linearly. Investigators noted that the confession had reshaped the trajectory of inquiry, even as it failed to solve it. Strategies, priorities, and hypotheses had all been adjusted, leaving an imprint on the investigation's DNA. Institutionally, the investigation shifted further toward preservation. Digital archives were strengthened, physical evidence meticulously cataloged, cross-referenced, and redundantly stored. Notes, witness statements, timelines, and procedural memos were collated into comprehensive databases designed not only for present analysis but for future access. The aim was to ensure that when new techniques, technologies, or perspectives emerged, the case could be revisited without losing continuity. In a sense, the investigation had become its own artifact, a record of uncertainty curated with painstaking care. By the end of the 10th phase, the Tokyo 2001 cold case existed in a state of controlled suspension. Evidence had been examined, patterns identified, anomalies noted, yet the central question, what truly happened, remained unresolved. The confession, once explosive, now functioned as a complex reference point, its influence subtle but undeniable, shaping interpretation without providing closure. The investigation no longer raced toward revelation. It sustained itself on rigor, patience, and the quiet recognition that some truths are neither immediate nor absolute. The city, for its part, continued as if oblivious. Commuters passed through the same stations, unaware of the lives and questions entwined in the shadows of stairways and platforms. New construction, new signage, new surveillance cameras obliterated fragments of memory, leaving only investigators, family, and archived records to trace the faint outline of what once happened. In this phase, the cold case's power was no longer in shock or confession, but in persistence, the relentless endurance of absence, a reminder that some mysteries resist resolution indefinitely, shaping both the human and institutional psyche long after the initial moment of disappearance. The 11th phase began without fanfare, almost as if the case itself had grown too weary for spectacle. After years of analysis, reconstruction, confession review, and procedural rigor, the investigation had settled into a state that was neither active nor dormant, a suspended tension that existed in every meeting, every archived file, and every lingering question. The confession, once a shock that rippled across Japan, now hovered at the edges of interpretation, neither proven nor dismissed, a shadow that shaped the case without illuminating it. Investigators returned repeatedly to timelines, comparing and cross-referencing every minor detail. Surveillance footage, long archived, was re-examined frame by frame, focusing on motion, light, behavior. A commuter's fleeting glance, a pause at a vending machine, a hesitation in the crowd. Every nuance was catalogued, every anomaly recorded. None pointed conclusively to an outcome, yet each added texture, building a mosaic of the night that was rich in possibility and poor in certainty. The city itself became a witness, its architecture, transit routes, and overlooked alleys forming the backdrop of an unresolvable puzzle. Buildings had changed, streets redirected, stairways reconstructed. The Tokyo of 2001 existed only in memory and maps, yet the investigation attempted to inhabit that temporal landscape, imagining her path, the decisions she made, the interactions that may have occurred. Each reconstruction emphasized the ordinary turned unforgiving. A city's rhythm, the ebb and flow of commuters, the unnoticed dangers embedded in routine. Behavioral analysis of the confession continued in parallel. Linguists, psychologists, and criminologists dissected word choice, phrasing, emotion, pauses, and inconsistencies. Their conclusion was uniform. The confession was partial, complex, and resistant to categorization. It may indicate proximity without direct action, knowledge without culpability, or performance informed by years of media exposure and investigative detail. None of these interpretations could be proven, yet all were plausible. The confession remained a ghost in the system, shaping thought but resisting resolution. Meanwhile, minor clues from archival reviews gained prominence. Handwritten notes from early interviews, dismissed at the time, were reconsidered. Slight contradictions between witness recollections and logistical records suggested that memory had been imperfect, distorted by time or stress. Investigators realized that the cold case had not just survived years of inattention, it had survived the natural degradation of human recall, creating gaps that could never fully be filled. The family, central yet peripheral, continued to navigate grief and public memory. They had become quiet custodians of absence, emphasizing remembrance and humanity over speculation and accusation. Their public statements framed the case not as an unfolding drama, but as a reflection on loss and resilience. This framing subtly guided investigators' approach, ensuring that procedural rigor remained tethered to human consequence, that the case did not become abstraction entirely divorced from its emotional core. As procedural work continued, new technology offered small but significant refinements. Pattern recognition software, social network analysis, and geographic profiling were applied retrospectively, highlighting relationships and proximities previously invisible. Yet each computational revelation offered hypotheses, not conclusions. Probability replaced certainty, suggestion replaced proof. Investigators learned to interpret these outputs cautiously, aware that any error could magnify uncertainty rather than reduce it. The confession, the physical evidence, and the reconstructed timelines together created a landscape of ambiguity. Each element illuminated something, obscured something else, and highlighted the impossibility of singular narrative. The Tokyo 2001 cold case was no longer linear. It was a lattice of partial truths, missed opportunities, and enduring questions. Attempts to impose order revealed only how complex the underlying reality had always been. By the close of the 11th phase, the investigation had achieved a form of equilibrium. No dramatic breakthroughs occurred, yet progress was measured in preservation, clarity, and refined understanding. The confession's shock had faded, replaced by reflection, yet its presence was indelible, a marker of human error, perception, and limitation. The case's power now resided not in revelation, but in endurance, the ability of absence to persist, shaping memory, investigation, and expectation decades after a single night. Tokyo continued to move, indifferent to the cold case's persistence. Commuters passed the station, the same platform she had walked, oblivious to the enduring question embedded in space and time. Buildings replaced streets, shadows shifted, and the city's pulse carried on, unchanging in its capacity to obscure as much as it reveals. And within this, the investigation, the confession, and the memory of a vanished life remained, a lingering presence unresolved, haunting in its quiet persistence, proving that some mysteries endure not through resolution, but through their refusal to ever be forgotten. The 12th phase unfolded like a whisper through the corridors of memory, subtle but persistent, a reflection of how absence can echo long after the world believes it has moved on. By now, the investigation existed less as a pursuit and more as a living archive, a framework holding together fragments of what had happened, what might have happened, and what would never be known. Each document, each photograph, each recorded statement functioned as both evidence and relic, a testament to a story that refused closure. In this phase, investigators turned to context in a way they hadn't before. They examined patterns across Tokyo, across time, across other unresolved disappearances, asking whether her disappearance fit into a broader tapestry of the unseen, the unnoticed, the avoidable tragedies hidden in plain sight. Minor disturbances recorded over decades, anonymous complaints, missing items, brief confrontations, were cross-referenced with her last known movements. Connections emerged not as leads pointing to a culprit, but as a lattice of circumstance, highlighting the precariousness of ordinary life in a city of millions. The confession, long stripped of its initial shock value, was now viewed almost anthropologically, a reflection of human psychology rather than fact. Linguists dissected tone, cadences, and choice of words. Criminologists considered motive and opportunity. Memory experts noted how details could have been influenced by media exposure, imagination, or the inexorable passage of time. Each analysis deepened understanding without producing resolution. The confession had become both a tool and a mirror, revealing, obscuring, and challenging all at once. At the same time, small technical breakthroughs offered new ways to interact with old data. Machine learning algorithms applied to transit logs, surveillance footage, and municipal reports highlighted correlations invisible to human eyes. One such correlation suggested that during the hours surrounding her disappearance, subtle patterns of movement repeated near her route, people who passed and lingered, minor delays, shifts in routine, all mundane individually, but collectively suggestive of subtle environmental vulnerabilities. No suspect emerged, no definitive clue crystallized, but a new framework for understanding how she might have been approached began to take shape. Family and community influence evolved in parallel. The relatives, once publicly demanding closure, now carefully curated remembrance. Social media posts, anniversary reflections, and quiet memorials reminded the city of her humanity. Interviews emphasized routines, habits, and quirks, grounding the case in lived experience rather than speculation. For investigators, this focus was a subtle guidepost. The case was about a life interrupted, not a headline solved. Each document preserved, each analysis performed, carried the weight of accountability, if not legal, then moral. The city itself remained a silent participant. Renovation, reconstruction, and shifting urban dynamics had erased traces, yet it also offered clarity. Patterns in geography, accessibility, and routine human behavior that might never have been visible in 2001 could now be mapped and analyzed. The city, ever indifferent, provided the environment that had facilitated absence, showing how ordinary spaces could harbor extraordinary mysteries. Investigators began to see the case less as a single moment and more as an intersection of systemic vulnerability and human unpredictability. Public perception, long distant, returned occasionally in reflections, documentaries, and retrospectives. Journalists, historians, and cultural commentators cited the Tokyo 2001 cold case as emblematic of unresolved grief and urban anonymity. In these moments, the case transcended crime reporting. It became a meditation on memory, surveillance, and the unknowable spaces within cities and lives. For the public, it was a story of fascination. For investigators and family, a story of enduring presence. By the close of the 12th phase, the investigation had settled into what some described as active preservation. Evidence cataloged, timelines refined, social and environmental context documented. The confession, once explosive, now lingered as a quiet, ambiguous ghost. A reference, a warning, a lens into human psychology. The cold case's true power was not in resolution, but in endurance. The persistence of questions, the reverberation of absence, the shaping of memory across time. Tokyo carried on, moving past platforms, streets, and shadows, unconcerned with a life that had vanished decades ago. Yet for those bound to it, family, investigators, and the faint pulse of public consciousness,